safe end. We might say her life, her choice. Others in similar circumstances may choose differently, but that's what it's all about. It's a matter of choice. And we may hear from Jean later. Now, of course, several attempts to achieve an assisted dying law have happened through private members' bills, which have all failed for one reason or another. And because all political parties say that it will be a matter of a conscience vote, we seem to be trapped in an unbreakable loop where no government will give the matter sufficient time, nor make it government business. Yet we know that an overwhelming majority of the public support having an assisted dying law. And that's whichever poll you look at. So we think that the best solution is to set up a governmental inquiry which can ensure that all groups are represented, have a chance to be heard, evidence can be heard from abroad and scrutinised, and then hopefully we can get the political parties to agree that the recommendations of such an inquiry would actually be put into effect. Now we see Scotland, Jersey and the Isle of Man moving apace towards introducing a law, but Westminster is dragging its heels. And wouldn't it be absurd if people from Gretna Green could have an assisted death, but over the border in Carlisle, they couldn't? And looking further afield, there are now 27 jurisdictions around the world that have an assisted dying law. And on our calculations, that's around 350 million people. And with today's population information, it's probably even more than that. And two of the most recent are Spain and New Zealand. And the number is growing. Only last month, President Macron announced a citizens' convention for France, possibly leading to a referendum. So we think the time has come for our politicians to be bold too. Well, there will be plenty of time for questions later. If you'd like to reserve your questions until we've heard from all of the speakers. First, I'd like to introduce Christine Jardine, and thank you again for coming.
Well, thank you very much for asking me, and it's a pleasure's the wrong word, because it's not a situation that any of us are either happy with the current situation, entirely comfortable, I think, sometimes talking about, or as a society we have got to grips with totally. But as we've heard, all the research that's been done tells us that the public is in favour of certainly a very narrow definition, but a definition of which would allow people choice at the end of their life. Now, this is not something that I have come to newly as an MP. I, for a long time before I was elected, thought, why do we not allow people the choice? Why do we insist that they go through unnecessary pain? Why do we put their families in an intolerable position? And why are we living in a society where actually assisted dying is available, but only if you can afford it? And so I then came into contact with Margot MacDonald, with whom I had worked when I was a young reporter. And Margot was an SNP MP and then an independent MP in Parliament at Holyrood. And she brought two versions of an assisted dying bill to Holyrood. Unfortunately, she passed away herself before the second one could be go through the final stages. But both were rejected by MSPs. And now my colleague Liam MacArthur is putting forward a third bill for the Scottish Parliament, which has been through consultation and had an astonishingly high rate of responses and supportive responses when it was out to public consultation. So my aim in all of this is not to force my view on anybody. It's not really even to have a view of what I would want for myself. It's to enable the public debate that I think we desperately need in this country. There is a public demand for change. And it's up to the public, I think, to lead their politicians in what they think that change should be. It's not a party political subject and shouldn't be a party political subject. It should be entirely a matter of choice. choice for the politicians who will vote on any legislation, and more importantly, choice for the people who find themselves in the position where they feel that life has become intolerable and they want that choice. And it's always seemed ironic that we cherish freedom of choice in this country above almost anything else. It's the right that we, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, but freedom of choice, we value. And yet in this most fundamental and valuable of decisions, we don't have that freedom. We don't offer it to people. And I've often thought about death and what it would mean to me. And we all, I think about this when we see people around us dying. And I've watched some people that I'm very close to. One of them was my mother, dying, drawn out deaths, painful deaths. And I thought, what would she have done if she had had the choice? Now, I don't know what she would have done if she had had the choice. And we didn't ask her what she would do if she had the choice. But at least she would have had the choice. She could have made the decision. And I've thought about it myself, and I don't know what I would do. I genuinely do not know what my decision would be. Like most people, ideally, I'd like my last day to be spent with the people I love, with my family around me, happy, and to leave them with happy memories. But I don't know if I'll get that choice. I don't know if any of us will. And that's what I feel as well. I also feel that alongside a change in giving people choice led, as I say, by the public debate, we need better palliative care. Because too often the two are set up as mutually exclusive. Or we can't have assisted dying, what we need is better palliative care. Or what we must, no, the two go together. Because surely the right to choose how and when your life should end is the ultimate in palliative care. So the two, for me, go together. And it all comes down to choice and equality and the right for each of us to have what we think is best for us. Now, I know that there are dangers, and I know that there are people who claim that it's a wedge, and once you open the floodgates, there will be abuses of the system. But that is why we need the debate, we need parliamentary scrutiny, and we need a very, for me, tight, narrow definition, which is legally astute and takes all of that into account. And I think only then will we be giving people what they deserve, the freedom to end their lives in a way that is acceptable to them in the strictest of circumstances, where they have an end of life prognosis, short term, and they have made the decision at a time when they were mentally competent and it's been signed off by the medical profession. I think we have come a long way as a society. We've had a lot of social progress and change. And I think that this is the last, if you like, of the great social taboos and decisions that we have to make, that we have to recognise. We've come a long way since the last time it was debated in Parliament. And from what I hear in Scotland and what I see every day and the representations I get from my constituents, we've come a long way in Scotland. And Scotland is very close this time to passing a law, and we'll see what happens when the debate comes to the Scottish Parliament. But I do think that what we need to do now is open up the debate, listen to what people have to say, take those ideas on board, and then reflect it in legislation from Parliament. So I'll be quiet now and hear what you've all got to say on why the status quo just isn't enough. Thank you.
Thank you, Christine. Christine has forewarned me that she does have to leave early for another commitment. that point you make about palliative care and assisted dying is well made, in the sense that I think there's a danger of treating assisted dying as something separate, when in fact, when you look at the countries where it's allowed, it's very much part of a spectrum of end-of-life choices. So I think it's a very important one. So now I'd like to hand over to Matt Warman.
No, thank you, and thank you, Christine. So I thought that was an incredibly eloquent exposition of where we are. I just say two or three things, and then I just want to talk a little bit about what success might look like for this sort of campaign. For me, this is an incredibly straightforward issue. It seems perverse that people who are at the end of their life, who are in extreme circumstances, are denied the choices that you and I, as able-bodied early people who are not in that position, have now. And that just seems to be a very simple matter of freedom. And I don't understand why governments historically have chosen to interpose themselves in between individuals and that kind of choice. And so in that sense, having the debate, as Christine said, is all the more important, because I think it is possible to demonstrate that whether it's countries around the world, whether it is other issues that have been raised by opponents of assisted dying in the UK, it is possible to demonstrate that you can get over those hurdles in a way that doesn't compromise the freedom of other people who clearly are implacably against this stuff, but lays the choice out for other people. And I think this is not a debate that anyone ever wants to have in angry terms, but I do think we want to, as proponents of this, I think we should, I hope, want to be able to preempt some of the arguments that we've seen made in Westminster Hall recently and in Parliament more broadly, and explain why it is possible to get over them. And some of that is about saying, for me, for instance, you can look at the laws in other countries that work relatively well, and you can look at the progress that's being made around childs that is obviously going only in one direction. You can look at the progress in Parliament, where the mood in all of the recent debates has only been going in one direction. And you can, I think we can start to say, for instance, that we ask doctors to do immensely difficult things in a whole host of circumstances, and there clearly is a mood amongst the medical profession that has shifted, and that is huge progress. But we keep coming up against this problem that essentially in the UK Parliament, we need to get lucky with a private member's bill. And that to me doesn't seem like it's a good enough solution in something where we know the public is in a very different place, and where we know that the randomness of a parliamentary ballot and then the randomness of whoever wins that parliamentary ballot feeling like this is the thing they care about most is where everything should end. That feels really unfair to me. So what might we aim for? Christine rightly said that this is a cross-party issue. For me, I'd love to say we could make some progress in advance, but I wonder if there is a way of having this debate where we can get cross-party consensus that results in something appearing in all three major manifestos and obviously in the SNPs as well. Now, for me, that would be maybe a royal commission, maybe the sort of governmental inquiry type model. But I do think there is genuine consensus across parliaments, across parties, that this is an issue that merits debate. And that's all we're asking for. No one's asking for a whipped vote at the end of this, but I do think there is a version of this that says we need to keep having the debate, we need to keep having the pressure kept up in various different legislatures across the UK. But ultimately, I think success looks like manifesto commitments to look at this in a serious way. And I would hope that for all the kerfuffle that UK politicians have been through over the last few years, we could agree that there are some things that are above party politics. And the fact that we've had really powerful conversations in Westminster Hall most recently, but in Parliament as well, coming from Paul and many others on the Labour benches, coming from coming from the Lib Dems, coming from the SNP, coming from the Conservatives as well. I would hope that maybe with campaigns like MyDeath-MyDecision and those that are around this, we could aim for something that for once uses an election to transcend party politics. My willful naivety may yet be proved wrong, but I would like to think that there are some issues where we can at least try and get a commitment of some sort, and I would really hope that that's what may allow us to move on beyond the difficulties of being stuck in that parliamentary shuffle process, which just feels like it is doing such a huge injustice to so many people today and to so many people of the future as well, because we know from around the world that it can be done and there is no excuse not to do it today.
Thank you so much. That was very constructive suggestions there. Well, now I'd like to hand over to Silvan Luley, who, as I said, is from Dignitas, and he has a unique perspective on this whole arena, and he'd like to share some thoughts with us today. Silvan.
Thank you, Joe. Well, it's not so unique. It's actually echoing on all that has been said so far. But anyway, I'm reading this out to you. I couldn't memorize it all. Even apologizing, also apologize for my accent. I'll try my best. English is not my native language, obviously. So, on the 25th of October 2002, Anthony, a man born in 1925, living in a village in the northwest of Wales, made use of physician-supported, professionally accompanied assisted dying in Switzerland at Dignitas to die with dignity, known briefly as Dignitas. Anthony suffered from an adenocarcinoma of the esophagus with metastasis. He had been in and out of hospital, and in August of that year he had been told that there was no cure. He made use of palliative care, but he wanted to have an additional choice. This is now 20 years ago. Since then, up until today, 521 people from this country have traveled to Dignitas just like Anthony. In 2008, there was Daniel James, a rugby player from the UK, who in a sports accident 6 years earlier had his neck vertebra dislocated. You can read about him in the press. In months of therapy, he regained some control over his fingers. He's via the electric wheelchair. On several occasions, though, he tried to put an end to his situation by doing suicide, and obviously failed. Thereafter, he traveled to Dignitas. A year later, Birmingham-born conductor Sir Edward Downes and his wife Lady Downes made use of assisted dying at Dignitas. The statement by their children read, I quote, "After 55 happy years together, they decided to end their own lives rather than continue to struggle with serious health problems. They died peacefully and under circumstances of their own choosing." Now, did all of them, Anthony, Daniel James, Downes, did they do so? Did they travel to Dignitas because the UK would not offer the medical care they needed? Did they do so because the UK would not offer access to good palliative care, maybe even palliative sedation for terminally ill cancer patients? No, they made use of all these options. In fact, they left Britain for Switzerland, and they had to leave their home for two reasons. One, they wished to determine the manner and the point in time their suffering would end. And two, they wished for professional assistance in this. Also, for the loved ones to be at their side, and sensibly, they did not want to choose a use of suicide, such as Daniel James had tried. And just remind you of the words of MP Paul Bloomfield, who was just a few days ago speaking about his father. Few words about Dignitas. Dignitas is a Swiss non-profit human rights membership association founded in 1998 by a group of people with attorney at law Ludwig A. Minelli, who, by the way, in December next month is going to turn 90. which proves that dealing with assisted dying issues prolongs your life. Many years before that, he founded an organization in 1977, which was aiming to educate and empower and implement human rights issues in Switzerland, the European Convention on Human Rights. Bring that up in Switzerland and implement it and educate on it. And interestingly, at quite an early stage, he said, where is the right to life, protection of life, which is a fundamental, important protection, rule, constitutional right, whatever you want to call it, in all countries. He said, well, there's a right to life. There's also a right to die, a right to choose your end, a right to decide on when it should end. And he claimed at a very early stage that this is a human right protected by the European Convention on Human Rights. In 2011, the European Court of Human Rights, in a court case done by Dignitas, acknowledged this is the case. Every capable, every competent individual who is able to act and make up their mind has the freedom and right to decide on time and manner of their own end in life. Now, Dignitas activities reach considerable beyond assisted dying, extending to palliative care, advanced healthcare planning, suicide attempt prevention, and more. Dignitas is about a comprehensive approach to safeguard and improve quality of life until the end. Dignitas sees assisted dying as part of healthcare, where it is now embedded in some countries. Just last week, I've been to Toronto to the World Federation of Right to Die Society's biennial conference held by Dying with Dignity Canada. They've had it for 7 years. It's perfectly implemented in the healthcare system, which proves it can be done in just 7 years. Nobody should find themselves in the situation of having to turn to Dignitas. And when the work of Dignitas and similar organizations has been implemented in the healthcare and social welfare system of each country, an organization like Dignitas can close down because they won't be necessary anymore. Swiss law sets a frame for professionally assisting in a competent individual to end their own life, which has been a practice for almost 40 years. The law dates back even longer. This frame supports comprehensive patient-doctor conversations on all healthcare and end-of-life choices considerations. And this opens the door to helping patients, whatever their pledge may be. Assisted dying is an option to choose from, just as palliative care and hospice care, as Claire said. Many people would prepare on several options so as to choose the one suitable to them depending on how the situation develops. At the end, only few make use of assisted dying. Knowing that there is a legal and professional guidance through an emergency exit just in case gives them relief and quality time also with their loved ones. Now, in recent years, Trevor mentioned it, an increasing number of countries have followed this insight by permitting individuals to end their suffering in life with the assistance of another person, such as medical or other professionals, whether the person themselves carries out the act that brings about death or someone else acts on their request. Australia, New Zealand, Canada, some US states, several European countries such as Spain, Austria, Germany, Italy, even Colombia. In all of these countries, the base for legalization of assisted dying were two factors. One, a majority of the public in favor of it, and two, the acknowledgement of the human freedom and right to decide on the time and manner of one's own end of suffering and life. Not only in recent years, but for several decades already, a majority of the public in the UK has expressed the wish to have the choice at home. There are many testimonials from individuals considering or making use of these laws and their families that having such choice provides relief, improves quality of life, encourages conversations beyond end-of-life matters, and more. There's a poll in Switzerland which shows that when patients have a GP that they can talk to openly about end-of-life issues, including assisted dying, they have a higher trust a higher, better relationship to that GP than the GPs that would not allow to talk about the issue. The negative impact of not having such choice weighs heavily. Research results, also here in the UK, shows how suffering people take to dire methods for ending their life, with risks to themselves, their loved ones, and sometimes negative consequences for others. Now just think of rescue teams that have to collect human remains from the railway tracks. Some have the strength to travel, I would say to escape, to Dignitas in Switzerland. Something burdened with negative consequences again. We'll hear about that. But not all British people can do so. It's not so much a matter of money, it's much a matter of strength. These people are in a state of health that traveling is often sheer impossible. Dignitas is a non-profit organization. We can waive costs. We can offer all our services for free for people who don't have money. But that does not change the fact that traveling to Switzerland is expensive, getting the assessment in Switzerland is expensive, and having the strength when you're very ill is the biggest difficulty that these people are facing. Now, both outcomes, people going to Dignitas or people taking the dire methods of ending their own life, but by whatever method there is, are obviously undesirable. The current legal status of assisted dying is inadequate and incoherent. These are not my words. These are the words of this country's Commission on Assisted Dying report 10 years ago already. In fact, the current legal status quo in this country is a violation of the British rights to health and protection of their lives, because it leads to premature deaths, either by people taking to dire methods, like trying to end their own life by a suicide attempt, or by traveling with Dignitas. And they would have to do so earlier so as to still be able to travel than when they had the choice here at home in this country. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this must change. Over 80 years ago, the House of Lords debated an assisted dying law bill. Britain was the first country in the world that had a right to die, a right to end-of-life choice organization. Assisted dying is not simply about the right to die, but the right to have one's life, one's human dignity, quality of life, health, and care respected by being provided with access to legal, medical, and professional assistance to safely end one's suffering in life in a manner and at a time of one's choice. I wonder, why should Britain not be able to do what Australia has done, what New Zealand did, what Canada did, what Switzerland did? Which is simply to respect people's pledge for choice over the end of their suffering and lives and implement assisted dying as an option alongside the existing healthcare measures. People in Britain, I think, hope it's not going to take another 80 years. I wish you freedom of choices, good health, and good quality of life until the end of your lives. Thank you.
Thank you, Silvan, and so much of what you said in there was true. Just picking up on people taking their own lives, we know from the Office for National Statistics that people who've got a terminal illness diagnosis are twice as likely to take their lives as people in the general population, for example. And also the relief that people feel if they are approved for an assisted death goes to show, for example, if you take Oregon, that about a third of people who are approved don't then follow through. It's the mental strength they get from knowing that when the going gets too tough for them, they can so choose, and then they don't go on to do that. So that's a very valid point. So now we're going to hear from Sue Lawford, who we all talk about, I say we all, I'm sure many of you have talked about going to Dignitas as if it's a glib, simple thing to do. Sue, out of a compassion, accompanied someone to Dignitas and has a real story to tell. So over to you, Sue.
Thanks. So it's February 16th this year, 5:30 in the morning, in the pitch dark. There's a loud banging on our door. The dog went berserk. My husband answered the door and called up, "Sue, it's the police, you better come down." I was arrested and taken into a police van with a locked cage in the back, which is where I was put, off to Cardiff Bay custody suite. As I left, four male officers entered the house and searched it, which took about 4 hours. Apparently no warrant was needed on this occasion because my alleged crime was the same as murder or terrorism. So why did this happen? In October 2021, there was a BBC Wales Investigates documentary asking the question, when would you want to die? There were 3 scenarios depicted, one of which involved a tetraplegic woman, Sharon Johnston, who was living in Carmarthenshire. She'd provisionally been given the green light to go to Dignitas at some future date, but because of her extreme physical difficulties, she had to have an escort. She had no family, and because she'd moved around from place to place while she was having rehabilitation after her injury, she lost touch with many of her closest friends. Because I also now live in Wales and I'm known as a campaigner to try and get a change in the law, I was asked to go. It's not the sort of question you expect to be asked every day. But as a humanist, I knew that if I was in her situation, I would hope that somebody would step up and help her. So aside from the possibility of a 14-year prison sentence, I couldn't honestly think of a good enough reason to say no. I felt it was a calculated risk because there'd actually been so few prosecutions in recent years. And I was pretty sure that the CPS guidelines would be met in my case. The medical report Sharon had submitted to Dignitas was out of date. It needed redoing. Fortunately, the chair of the Wales branch of MyDeath-MyDecision happens to be a doctor. So we went to visit Sharon on the 16th of December, the only time actually that I met her before we travelled to Switzerland, and the revised report was done and approved. Bear in mind that everything Sharon did, anything that needed to be printed or packed for her journey had to be done by her carers. She had a very small amount of movement in her right hand, that was all. So a date of the 15th of February was agreed, and Sharon made all the complex travel arrangements and booked a taxi, a wheelchair adapted taxi, to pick me up en route. So she left Cardigan at 5 AM on the morning of the 14th of February, Valentine's Day, and I joined the journey in Cardiff at 7 o'clock. I can only assume that her carers must have reported her missing when they arrived at her flat, as they normally would at 7:30, because it wasn't long after 7:30 that the first call from the police came through to Sharon's phone. She assured them that she was fine. She told them that she was visiting friends in Cardiff. They expressed concern and asked questions about who, what, where, and so on. When she declined to answer, simply repeating that she was absolutely fine, the call ended. Half an hour later, another call from the police, similar process. It was incredibly stressful for her on an already very stressful day. Another half an hour or so went by, and then social services rang. Similar conversation. It's rather difficult to understand these interventions because social services had actually visited Sharon just 3 days earlier to check how she was doing. Found her, having capacity, she was fine. And was she a prisoner in her accommodation, unable to leave without their permission? She was never, in my opinion, missing. They knew exactly what she was planning to do. They knew it was her decision and hers alone. In any event, we expect at any moment to see blue lights before we stopped on the M4. Well, Sharon found it very alarming. However, we finally made it to Heathrow, and she was, I can only use the expression, manhandled into her seat on the plane. That was an undignified process in itself. But we were on our way. On arrival in Zurich, Sharon had arranged a private ambulance to transfer to the Dignitas house so that the paramedics could help her transfer into a bed. The lovely Andrea greeted us and gave us a warm welcome. We arrived about 5 p.m, so by this time Sharon had been travelling for 12 hours, and the lovely Dr. Huber arrived about an hour later. We talked to Sharon about her decision, checked that she was still firm in her resolve, and she was. Dr. Huber and Andrea left. Another person who travelled with us, who I'll call M, is a PhD researcher doing a thesis on assisted dying. She was going to stay in a local hotel overnight, and she and I planned to get something to eat while Sharon made a couple of phone calls that she said she wanted to make. It was dark by this time. The blinds were closed. There was a knock on the door. M peered through the blinds. It was the Swiss police. David Powis had asked the Swiss police to intervene. So after an hour of questioning, they must have concluded that Sharon hadn't been abducted. She was of sound mind and there entirely of her own volition. Our nerves, as you can imagine, were in tatters, especially Sharon's. We made sure that she was okay, and Em and I left her to her phone calls and finally began to recover over some bruschetta and, I must say, quite a large glass of wine. I walked back to the Dignitas house at about 10 o'clock, giving Sharon some food and helped her get settled for the night. By some miracle, we seemed to manage to get some sleep. Andrea and another carer, Daniela, came at 8 o'clock on the 15th. Dr. Huber also returned to check once again that everything was in order. After a short conversation, he left, bidding Sharon a pleasant journey. She was given an anti-emetic drink, and we sat talking quietly while that worked. At 9 a.m, Sharon drank the medicine that would end her life through a straw, and within a minute or two she fell asleep. She woke briefly and just said, "This is a lovely feeling." A minute later she was gone. It was calm. Actually, it was beautiful. Em and I discussed what we might do while waiting for our 5 p.m. flight. And it was only 9:30, we realised that actually there was a lunchtime flight that if we left straight away we could get. Andrea called a taxi for us and we were on our way, planned to be heading home. We later discovered, had we caught the 5 o'clock flight, the police were at Heathrow waiting to arrest us. It seemed to us that the police action seemed to be heavy-handed. We know of several other accompaniments to Dignitas, to Life Circle and Pegasus, where no one has received so much as a phone call. If nothing else, surely the law, which is the same through England and Wales, must be applied consistently. Em was arrested at 11:30 on the 15th in London, taken all the way to Ammanford, which is near Llanelli, to be questioned. So she endured 7 hours round trip travelling, plus 20 hours in a cell. As you already know, my arrest was in the early hours of the next morning, and I was held for just over 19 hours. We were both kept under arrest pending investigation for 6.5 months. Our goods were seized, laptops, iPads, phones, M's research notes, her recordings. They kept my passport and my driving licence, so I had no ID for months. They seized my husband's laptop and phone, so we recovered our property more than 7 months after we were arrested. And of course, we had to replace everything by then in order to do our work. All this could and should, in my opinion, have been avoided if we had a humane law in England and Wales. It's beyond time, I think, for at least a public inquiry, so that the concerns that some people have expressed can be thoroughly explored with expert evidence from medics, from lawyers, from politicians in jurisdictions where the laws have changed and are working.
Thank you, Sue, for that compelling narration of a fairly devastating story in many ways. Just as a little aside, according to data from YouGov, 79% of people in the UK don't believe that people who provide practical help to someone to obtain a medically assisted death abroad should face prosecution. And before I open this up to any questions people might have, I'd just like to summarise why, in answering the question that we've asked, what's wrong with the status quo, why it is that our current laws are broken. So one of the invidious aspects of our current law is that it encourages people to remain secret if they plan to travel to Switzerland for an assisted death. And I know of several instances where people have not wanted anyone to know for fear of circumstances arising that put them in a difficult position. And back in 2019, MyDeath-MyDecision did a Freedom of Information Act request to all of the police forces around the country to try and establish how many cases of assisted suicide had been investigated, and matching that with the data from the assisted dying organisation, we worked out that around a third of people who travel to Switzerland are unknown to the police and aren't investigated when they return. As Sue said, there are many, many people, some of them blazoned on the front pages of the tabloids, who've accompanied people who've never heard anything from the police. So there's a great inconsistency, but also the idea that there's some kind of protection of the vulnerable is just not true, because actually the vulnerable are feeling they have to remain secret and can't be open. It's also really difficult for the families and friends afterwards. They can't accompany the person to Switzerland for all sorts of reasons, and they can't grieve in the way that they might want to. There's discrimination. We've heard about Sharon's situation. She was physically incapable of making her own way to Switzerland, yet other people who are not quite so disabled can do that. And as Silvan has said, our current laws force people to resort to DIY methods with often really distressing results. And I know that from my own work, because I work with families following suicides. And I'd just like to pick up 2 adjectives that Sue said, which was calm and beautiful, in relation to Sharon's death. When Silvan and I were at the World Federation Conference, and just by chance I had been introduced to a doctor in Toronto by a mutual friend, and she told me about the assisted death that she attended of her best friend in Toronto, and the words she used were calm and beautiful. The woman was surrounded by 14 people and her dog, and it was all very open and loving, and the secrecy that our current laws create is completely invidious. So